In the beginning, it's natural to crave contact. You might catch yourself reaching for your phone, rehearsing what you'd say if you texted, or checking if they're online. But every time you resist, every time you sit with the silence instead of breaking it, you grow stronger. That strength compounds day by day. It's like training a muscle. The more you practice discipline, the more resilient you become. And with that resilience, you start to notice subtle shifts in your emotions. What once felt like overwhelming sadness begins to feel like calm. What once felt like desperate longing begins to turn into clarity. Silence also brings perspective. When you're caught up in constant communication, it's easy to miss red flags or to justify behavior that wasn't truly serving you. Without the noise, without the constant back and forth, you're able to reflect with honesty. You see the relationship for what it really was, not for what you wished it would be. You begin to acknowledge patterns. Maybe you were always giving more, maybe you were tolerating disrespect, or maybe you ignored your own needs just to keep the peace. These truths surface in the quiet, and while they may sting, they empower you to make better choices moving forward. The silence of no contact is also what shifts the power dynamic. Humans naturally value what isn't easily accessible. When you stop reaching out, when you stop feeding their ego with your constant presence, they feel the absence. It forces them to confront the reality that you are no longer in their grasp. Some may try to test your boundaries, others may retreat in confusion, but either way, the silence disrupts the cycle. It communicates more clearly than words ever could. You are no longer willing to play the role of someone who waits endlessly for crumbs of attention. On a deeper level, the silence helps you reconnect with yourself. Instead of filling the space with arguments, apologies, or explanations, you get to fill it with your own voice again. You begin to rediscover what excites you, what calms you, what you truly want out of life and relationships. And as you get stronger in your own identity, the need for their approval weakens. You start to see that the silence wasn't empty at all, it was full of lessons, growth, and healing that could only emerge when the noise stopped. This is why no contact works, even when it feels hopeless, because silence becomes the very thing that heals you and shows you your true strength. One of the most difficult parts of going no contact is trusting the process when everything inside of you is screaming that it isn't working. Your emotions often make you feel like you're losing rather than gaining. You may think, if I don't reach out, they'll forget me, or what if they move on and I lose them forever? These thoughts are natural, but they are also illusions created by fear. The truth is, no contact works because it interrupts unhealthy cycles and gives both people the space to face reality. It's not about trying to manipulate someone back into your life, it's about creating the conditions for truth to surface. And truth always reveals itself in silence. When you've been in a situation where you overgave, overchased, or settled for less than you deserved, your nervous system is wired to think constant communication equals safety. That's why no contact feels so threatening. It goes against that programming. But what you learn through staying consistent is that safety doesn't come from someone else's responses. It comes from your own ability to stay grounded even in uncertainty. Each day you choose not to break no contact, you reinforce this truth. You stop reacting to their absence and you start responding to your own needs. That shift may not seem obvious at first, but it gradually transforms your inner world. No contact also forces the other person to face the consequences of their actions. As long as you continue reaching out, forgiving easily, or keeping yourself available, they have no reason to reflect. But when you withdraw completely, when you stop engaging, they no longer have the comfort of your presence to soften the impact of their choices. They begin to feel the void, and that void often creates more reflection than any conversation ever could. It doesn't mean they'll always come back, but it does mean they'll have to reckon with the reality that they cannot treat people carelessly and still expect them to remain. Another hidden power of no contact is that it allows time for emotions to reset. When there has been conflict, chasing, or emotional imbalance, both sides are too clouded to see clearly. Space creates clarity. What felt urgent begins to lose its grip. What felt unbearable begins to feel manageable. This is how you regain emotional balance, by stepping back long enough for the emotional storm to pass. Once the emotions cool, you can think with logic, with self-respect, and with strength rather than out of desperation. And perhaps most importantly, no contact proves to you that you can survive without them. In the early stages, you might believe your world will fall apart if they're not in it. But the longer you stay disciplined, the more you realize that your world doesn't end, it expands. You rediscover parts of yourself you had buried under the weight of the relationship. You find new passions, new people, and new strength. What once felt like a loss begins to feel like liberation. This is why, even when no contact feels hopeless, it's actually working. Because it teaches you that your strength doesn't come from holding on, it comes from letting go. One of the greatest strengths of no contact is that it rebalances the power dynamic that was once heavily tilted against you when you were constantly reaching out, seeking reassurance, or waiting anxiously for a reply. You were unknowingly giving away your power. You were operating from a place of scarcity, believing that you needed this person's attention or validation to feel complete. But the moment you cut off that flow, the dynamic changes. Suddenly, you are no longer the one chasing. You are no longer the one handing over all of your energy. Instead, you are creating space where respect, attraction, and balance can be restored. Human nature is such that we often take for granted what feels guaranteed. When someone knows you will always be there no matter how they treat you, they stop valuing you. They stop putting in effort because your presence feels like a certainty. No contact disrupts that certainty. It reminds the other person, whether they admit it or not, that you are not to be taken for granted. It forces them to see that your presence in their life was not automatic. It was a choice, and it was a gift. By withdrawing, you silently communicate that your value is too high to remain where it is an honor. This shift also changes how they perceive you. When you are over-available, they may have subconsciously seen you as less desirable. But when you step back and allow space, you project strength, self-respect, and independence. People are drawn to those qualities. Attraction grows when there is a healthy sense of mystery, when someone is not always accessible, and when there is balance in the give and take. No contact, though difficult, rebuilds that sense of balance by removing the unhealthy patterns of chasing and overinvesting. At the same time, this is not just about shifting power with them, it's also about shifting power within yourself. As you resist the urge to break no contact, you slowly start reclaiming your emotional independence. You begin to realize that you are not powerless, that you do have control, and that you can choose self-respect over temporary comfort. That realization transforms you from a place of desperation to a place of strength. And even if they never return, the power dynamic that matters most is the one inside you. Because once you've proven to yourself that you can step back, detach, and remain grounded, you can never go back to the version of yourself that was dependent on crumbs of attention. You've elevated your standards and shown yourself that you are worthy of more. That inner shift ensures that no matter what happens externally, you never again settle for a dynamic where your worth is undervalued. This is why no contact works. It rebalances what was lost, it restores respect, and it shifts the dynamic back in your favor, both with them and within your own heart. When you stop chasing and step into no contact, you give the other person something they rarely experienced before: silence, space, and the reality of life without you. At first, they may not notice it. They may feel a sense of relief, even believing they have the upper hand. But as time passes, the absence begins to grow louder than words. They start to recognize the subtle ways you once enriched their life. Maybe it was the encouragement you offered when they were down, the consistency of your presence, or simply the warmth of your energy that made them feel secure. Without it, the void becomes undeniable, and that absence creates contrast. People often fail to appreciate something until it is no longer in reach, and no contact forces that realization in the deepest way. The mind works in patterns, and when someone is used to you being there, your sudden absence disrupts their expectations. That disruption causes them to reflect in ways they never would if you kept reaching out. They might replay conversations, remember old moments, or even realize how much easier life felt when you were in it. It's in that silence that they begin to question themselves. Did they underestimate you? Did they push away someone who truly cared? These questions don't usually surface when you're still giving them attention, because your presence masks the consequences of their behavior. But in no contact, there's nothing to cover it anymore. The emptiness speaks louder than any text you could send. What makes this even more powerful is the human tendency to assign value to what feels scarce. When you were always available, they could take you for granted because your energy seemed unlimited. But once it's gone, once you stop giving it freely, it becomes precious. Scarcity forces appreciation. They might not admit it openly, but inside, the realization begins to stir. And that's when your value starts to rise in their eyes, not because you chased them, but because you chose to walk away. At the same time, this absence doesn't just impact them, it transforms you. As you resist the urge to break no contact, you start to reclaim pieces of yourself that were lost in overgiving. You realize that your worth doesn't depend on their validation, and that your love, attention, and presence are gifts that not everyone deserves. This understanding builds a deeper level of self respect and self awareness. You begin to see yourself not as someone waiting to be chosen, but as someone who has the power to choose. And that shift is magnetic because, ironically, it's often when you no longer need them, when you found strength in your own silence, that they begin to crave you most. They feel the emptiness, they sense the contrast, and they start to realize that life without you isn't as fulfilling as they once thought. That is why time apart, though painful in the beginning, becomes one of the most powerful teachers of value. This is why no contact works, because absence reveals what presence once concealed. And in that contrast, true appreciation begins to awaken. No contact is often misunderstood as a tactic to manipulate the other person into missing you, but in truth, its deepest purpose is not about them at all. It is about you. It is about creating the space you desperately need to heal, to grow, and to rediscover the version of yourself that existed before the chaos of the relationship. When you cut off the constant stream of communication, you remove the